Welcome everyone. Thank you for coming here. So, Behrooz, could you tell us a little bit of something about yourself?
Yeah, of course. So I would like to talk about the general career trajectory and my personal experience being in tech for the past uh, 15 or so years. To your question, I guess I'll start with a background. I've been in tech, as I said, for about 15 years. I started very casually as a enthusiast, I guess, programming enthusiast when I was 14, 15. The thing that got me started, I was reading the Lord of the Rings book at the time. And being the technical person that I was, I thought it would be cool to start a website for it as like a fan base when I was back in Iran. So that sort of kickstarted me looking into how do you make your website? What does it involve? And what is HTML? At the time, PHP was the hottest programming language on earth. So learning that, and through that, doing small projects for small companies, startups, and then over time, sort of doing more and more projects. And then I think when I was about 17, I joined a startup that specialized in Linux services and did their basically web development work, both front end and back end at the time. Then I started studying mathematics. It was a topic that to be honest, didn't think that would help me in the programming area that much. It was just an interest of mine. So I did that and then continued essentially being a developer over time. And then I sort of stayed in the startup world for a couple of years, switched to more what we call data engineering work these days, but at the time it was still like back-end development of collecting data and then piping it through different systems and understanding it, anomaly detection, all that sort of stuff. And my mathematics background really helped on that front. Then I moved to the US to formally study computer science. Interestingly, before that, I had no academic background in computer science and programming. Everything I knew was self-taught, more or less, in different settings. I got my master's from Boston in computer science and AI. Stayed in the Boston startup scene for another couple of years, and then wanted to experience working at a larger company. So joined, and I love music, so I joined Spotify 3 years ago, around the same time as now, actually, as in the data science side, and have sort of moved towards managing teams and managing people in the past 2 years since then. Let me see, I cover, yeah, pretty much. So management is also a newish thing. I was mostly an individual contributor for my career, apart from managing small teams or managing projects, and more recently managing teams. Cool. I really just wanted to
All
talk
right.
about
Yeah.
a few things. Please absolutely do post whatever questions that you have. I really want this to be you all asking me questions. And let me know if I can, if you have any specifics, interests that you want me to talk about. But the main things that I wanted to go over today was sort of a conglomerate of a few topics that people ask me a lot about, and they want to know. I feel like this group is mostly people who want to enter tech or people who are in tech but early on or studying related fields. So my talk is mainly focused on that aspect, although if there are questions outside of that, I'm also happy to answer those. Um, the main thing, I was going over one of the talks that you had a few weeks ago, and some of the questions that came up was, what programming language should we use? You know, like what sort of tech stack should we invest in? And what areas should we really dig into and like learn right now, etc. What I've learned in my career is that that's not that as important as people think it is. Um, my reasoning for it is essentially that when I started programming, as I said, PHP was a thing. There was a thing called DHTML that none of you probably have heard of, and the entire development cycle was vastly different. Git. I remember 5, 6 years into my career, Git version 1 was published. Before it, we used a software called CSV or CVS or something like that. So long story short, I really want to stress that it's less so investing in tools. And I've had this dilemma myself a lot of times. I'm like, what if I learn this programming language and in 5 years it doesn't exist anymore, or there are no jobs for it? To me, answering that question is similar to answering what the stock market is going to be in 5 years. It's very hard to answer. People have their different takes and their different understanding of the situation, but there are underlying concepts that are the same throughout time. Like a lot of the programming concept that existed in PHP now exists in Python. And I mentioned Python because Python is a programming language that we mainly use at Spotify for data science work and other types of work. I've used it as a backend engineer a lot as well, using Django, using Flask, and other frameworks. So the takeaway that I have is some technologies come and go. Try to understand what makes them special and what makes them attractive to certain groups. And don't think that because you've invested in a programming language, if that programming language goes away in 5 years, then you're lost. That's fine. You'll learn a different programming language, and the second time is going to be much easier to do because you've retained that underlying knowledge. So that's the main thing. It also, I have to say though, it affects the job market. If you search for jobs, they usually say preferred Python, or there are a lot of websites that rank programming languages based on how many jobs there are. Stack Overflow does a similar thing, like how many questions do people ask for certain programming languages. So I'm not saying that it doesn't matter if you want to find a job right now. Probably it's a good idea for you to know the programming languages that are common and there are jobs for it. Just don't stress over it that much. Things change and that's totally fine, and you'll learn the next thing. I personally spend a lot of energy stressing over that, so I'm just passing that on. The other part that is sort of related is try to understand the theory behind what's happening. There is a move recently, if you read between the lines, towards programming languages that are type safe, for example. And this comes from a need in the production environment to be able to express your language in your program in a more concrete way, so that you don't have to deal with a lot of bugs that are related to lack of type safety. This happened when I was at startups and we were coding. You have an argument in a function, and it's in Python until before the version 3 release, things weren't type safe at all. So someone passed a dictionary where a list was expected and there was a bug. So see these trends instead of seeing what programming language is trending. See why this programming language is trending. What features does it have that attracts people, and then try to learn more about those. Why type safety is so important for people. I think those are the things that gives you a deeper understanding, and over time those accumulate, and regardless of what programming language you end up using or what web stack or what development stack you're using, the concepts, in my experience, relatively remain the same over time. But I say learn from the basics and learn the concepts, but don't do it at the beginning. I see a lot of people trying to learn what is a programming language and then theory of programming languages from the start. And that doesn't work for me, because to be able to retain the information, you need to have seen that problem. You need to have hit that problem at some point to understand why this solution makes sense. So try to, in a Pythonic way, do it and then ask for forgiveness. Do things, get started, learn stuff, and then when you hit the wall, don't just copy paste the answer from Stack Overflow. Try to see why did I hit this wall? What underlying phenomena caused it? And that is the learning experience for me on that front. The other, like getting out of theory and tools a little bit. The other thing that I think is very important is sort of understanding who you are. This gets a little bit philosophical, so apologies in advance, but I think it's very important as I see different kinds of people in tech, and as tech becomes more of a commodity, which it is becoming, you know, like 15 years ago, 20 years ago, being in tech was a very niche thing. There was a small group of people who were highly specialized that did this kind of stuff. These days, it's a commodity. These days, it's a very common job for people to have. And in this scenario, it's important to know where in that system you fit. You know, again, in one of the talks I read, that I saw that someone was asking, I want to move from front end to back end, or like I want to move from this aspect, oh, I want to become a data engineer. A lot of those decisions is what fascinates you, you know, and like you have to ask yourself, why am I in tech? And a very valid answer is I want to be in tech because it pays very well and it gives me job security, and it's an industry that is growing. I think that's a very valid way of thinking about it. I'm not criticizing that at all. I have friends who are in it because of that. But knowing that helps you know that what position in a tech industry you will be at. You know, like if tech isn't your passion and you're passively attracted to this area because of the benefits that it has, then go for being a software engineer at a company, know that kind of thing, and go for it. You know, like people who do research have a very specific research-driven mentality, you know, and sort of in that mindset, when I hire at Spotify, just to give you an idea, the team that I manage includes people who are from an arts background, all the way to physics PhD and mathematics PhD, all the way to formal comp sci or data science training. And they do different things, and each one of them are important for the success of my team. You know, I don't expect what I expect from a PhD from the person who has, for example, not a formal background in mathematics, but they play their part in that ecosystem, which I think is great because it means that everyone from every background can be in tech and can be successful in tech, because this market is growing. There's going to be more need for people to be in this market. But then a lot of people, when I'm hiring them and I say, okay, let's talk about what you've done, they only feature neural networks. You know, I've done this neural network that does this. I've done this AI system that does that. I ask them, what's your interest? And they say, I want to build AI models that are very complex, that do this and this and this. That's great. That's fantastic. I think I don't want to discourage anyone from doing that. I just want to give you the reality check of 90% of the work, for example, in my field of data science does not involve the neural network. And I think that's true with the industry. There is just maybe 10% of problems that require very advanced knowledge of something. I think that's true with engineering as well. Majority of the engineering jobs don't involve novel solutions or creating things that don't exist. It's a matter of using the technology that already exists and facilitating in the best way possible, and there's nothing wrong with that. So this idea of some things need to be very complex or very novel for it to be worth it, I don't think is a very warranted idea. Just checking my notes. Yeah, another note on the personality side, I think, is I personally, I don't pay a lot of attention to detail. I'm not a very detail-oriented person, you know. That's why architecture and distributed system has always attracted me in the engineering side. You know, like I like to architect systems that do certain things and design them at a higher level, but I'm not necessarily good at writing the most efficient code possible. You know, that's also a personality thing. That's not necessarily better than someone who writes amazing efficient code at a low level. A company needs both of that. So try to understand what part of tech attracts you and what part of tech fits in with your personality and go for that. I have a friend who's going through a boot camp right now, and as a creative person, my suggestion to him is definitely go to the front end route. I see a question. Let me get a break and answer that. Yeah, so the question is, I'm breaking into machine learning engineering from software engineering background. Could you share some insight on what ML engineering do in the field of your work? Um, I did the same. I moved from software engineering into ML engineering. The stuff that an ML engineer does at Spotify is essentially a mix. It's different at different companies. Like I'll give you the example of Google and Facebook, which I think do it differently, and I'll give you an example of Spotify, and I'll give you an example of a startup. On the startup side, as an ML engineer, um, you are expected to do a lot of different things, which, given your background, is very useful. You know, like when I was at startup as a ML engineer, I used to write Android code to collect data from the app and then pipe it all the way to our analytics background and then do machine learning there and then push it back to production. You know, at Spotify, no one expects me to do that because you have people who are specialized in doing Android development. You know, so the bigger the company gets, the more specialized your role is going to be in that ecosystem. At Spotify, ML engineers do discover weekly type work, so recommender systems. They implement a lot of algorithms that help us with our search features, our understanding of users and when they're going to listen to what type of content, so that, again, feeds back into the recommender aspect of it. But my team specifically applies machine learning to a lot of business problems. So not necessarily even user-facing problems, but problems like how can I automatically detect when our data has issues in it? Can I train a model that finds anomalies in data, or can find anomalies in streaming so that we can better understand what's happening to our platform? So I usually classify it as user-facing ML products and then business ML products. And both of them use ML in different capacities. The product side usually involves integrating your model into the product, meaning that you usually have a microservice that can serve predictions to the user, etc. The business side doesn't have that. It's usually you have offline predictions, you store them in a table of some sort, and then you do post-analysis on that. And then finally, at a very large company like Google and Facebook, then things get very specialized. You usually have researchers that don't implement anything. They just research. They do a proof of concept. They come up with models and methodologies that can solve the problem. And then you have ML engineers whose job is to turn that research into ML code that goes into the platform. They do that because then each person can be specialized in their own field, and then you get better, efficient code and then better, efficient research projects at the same time. My recommendation, if you're going from software engineering background to machine learning background, is definitely use your understanding of performance. I see a lot of machine learning engineers not know that and not be good at that. And also, so take advantage of that. And that's actually one of my talking points, is definitely move towards the direction where you can most leverage your existing knowledge, even if your existing knowledge is not necessarily in tech. A lot of the people that are very successful at Spotify are folks who have a very specific business understanding around finance or around legal, around rights, royalties, which is a thing that music streaming companies care about. And they added on knowledge from software engineering or data analysis, and now they're this unique person and unique added value to a system, and they're very in demand because they bridge the gap between those two worlds together. So if you're tempted to scratch whatever you know right now and go with a completely different field, I say, like, think about it very carefully. Like, there are a lot of times where two seemingly unrelated fields can be joined together to create a very unique offering as a person to the industry. Yeah, I hope I answered your question. Let me know if you have any follow-ups. going to the next page.
Uh, so Behrooz,
Yeah,
I have a question. Like,
go for it.
mm, well, you've been in the industry for like 15 years, and yeah, that's quite a long time. It's, and during these times, breaking into tech, I think it's quite, it's quite different now. So, do you think like it's easier in, today's time to break into the tech industry as compared to your time before?
Absolutely. Um, the, think about it from a demand perspective and supply perspective. The supply hasn't caught up with the demand for talent and technology. And that's the reason that this existed. When I started doing this, having someone from an unrelated field getting a job in tech was very rare. Um, it happens so frequently now that people from different backgrounds go to boot camps and get trained on a very specific topic and then find a job. People from, at my time, again, like people usually were from an academic background of computer science or related fields, and then they evolved into a tech industry job. Now that's rarely the case. Not rarely, but that's not as much of the case. So I think it's easier overall to break into tech because there's just significantly more jobs that exist, and the number of people in tech haven't grown as much.
Mm.
Cool.
How about
And
how about in the far future? Like, how do you think the situation is gonna be in the far future for the
um,
going
depends
into the
on
tech industry?
depends on your definition of far. But I don't see any risks to this industry in the next 10, 15 years. Um, as in, I don't see us rely less on technology in the next decade or two. If anything, we're going to rely more on technology. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is a separate story. But to me, number of jobs in the tech sector is directly related to how many services require a tech uh, site, and that's just going to grow in the near future, in my opinion. So I think the demand is going to grow and grow. What will happen, in my opinion, is you wouldn't have these crazy salary numbers. Maybe like as supply catches up to the demand, and as more people enter the industry, and the job loses its status as a very niche, um, very highly trained professional job into a more normal day-to-day job that people have, you can expect the salaries to decrease, and which I think is a good thing. I think salaries in tech are too high right now.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So you have other, you have more points in your
I do
notes.
have more points. Again, please feel free, anyone on the call, to interject me at any point. The other thing that a lot of people ask me is automation is coming. Uh, what does that mean for this industry, and what does that mean for people in the industry? As someone who is specialized in AI, I can tell you, yes, automation is definitely coming, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. When I was first doing web development, CMS's content management systems like WordPress didn't really exist. When the first few came out, people in the web dev community were really afraid that their jobs are going to get destroyed because everything's so easy now. You don't have to pay someone to make a website anymore. You can just create a WordPress website in 20 minutes and then be done with it. And it's sort of true, but the fact of the matter is that things switched. First of all, the demand increased. The number of people who wanted the website significantly outpaced the number of people who used WordPress. And then secondly, they specialize into either building things like WordPress or supporting things like WordPress, because every website that ever gets created and is successful at some point needs extra development on top of it. I think the same is true. Like, we are in a field that is going to be automated at first. I think the type of stuff that we do is very easily automated, because the language that is used to automate things is the same language that we use to write things. But that's not necessarily bad. So that's not a topic that I'm necessarily worried about. I think you have to adapt, and automation creates different types of jobs in the long run. I think someone, I mean, you have your mic on and you have some background noise. Um, cool. And then sort of dovetailing to specialization, that I think is rising. I mentioned a few examples of it. Automation is a reason that people would specialize in doing more specific things. Um, Multidisciplinary people is another example of the reason that there is a need for a specialization. Like, yes, you're an engineer. Yes, you're a software engineer. Like when I first started, you were a software engineer. Now you are a front-end engineer or a back-end engineer or a data engineer or an ML engineer, and this list goes on. Recently, we published in our blog post in Spotify an article about analytical engineering, which is different than all of that, and is a new field that is sort of coming up and getting traction over time. So a specialization is happening, and it's going to just become more and more of a thing, which is again a reason to uh, use the background that you have, use the things that you've studied, and try to be that cross section of multiple things that makes you a unique offering in this industry. M is asking, what is the culture at Spotify? It's great. Uh, can't recommend it more. Spotify is, I think, 6,000 people right now, but it's in a very good way retained its startup culture, which I think gets changed in a lot of big companies at this scale. It's a very flat structure, meaning that you don't have a lot of hierarchies, that people above you and there's people above you and above you. It's a very flat structure where people get to sort of decide what's important in their area and then decide what the priorities are and define what the projects are and then work with those. Um, it's a lot of people that love music. I always say this, but I applied for Spotify 3 times and got rejected 2 times, the first 2 times. Um, I frankly probably no one even saw my resume. But the fact is that I really wanted to be in the company because it is a music-driven company and I like music. And I think that's just true about a lot of people. There's a lot of community around making music and working with music within the company. There are bands and there are a lot of events around it. Unfortunately, with the pandemic, obviously everything sort of halted and everyone's working from home and trying to adjust to the new norm. But still, I think everyone's mentality is very, very positive. I'm yet to see someone who approaches the problem from the perspective anything other than trying to solve it and trying to be helpful. So I think it's a very um, healthy environment to work with, and people are very positive and respectful. And playful is one of our biggest values, and I think it really holds true. Um, Yeah, I talked about specialization. The only thing I'll add to that is even if you look at programming languages, you'll notice a trend towards uh, languages that are specialized. You know, you hear about Scala and you hear about languages that are specially crafted to write mobile apps. And like R is specially crafted to do data analysis and things of that sort. And this all to me indicates that this field is expanding a lot, and there are going to be different pockets of talent and different pockets of people and different pockets of knowledge because it's just becoming a bigger field and it's becoming more ubiquitous over time. That's really it. I have a few smaller things, but if you want to ask me about current trends, if you want to ask me about job search, how to get into companies, or if you have any questions around current technology, where things are going, I'm more than happy to answer those. Cool. Seems like my talk was either amazing and no one has any questions left, or it was not that great. While you guys think of that, the only other things that I want to mention is if you want to break into tech right now, um, my recommendations are as a person who hires, as a person who is responsible for hiring a lot of people within Spotify and then interviewing and talking, etc. I actually helped design our interview process for data scientists as well. The thing that I want to give you a perspective of from my point of view is when I see your resume and when I see your work, um, there are a few things that I look into. I'm like, one is, does this person have the relevant background? That splits into two things. Does this person have a academic training in this field? Or does this person have sufficient work that shows that they have the knowledge? Like if you're from an unrelated field to the tech industry, I want to see what you need to show me that you know the tools. Like I don't care if you don't have a background um, in comp sci or in mathematics, but if that's the case, I want to see a GitHub link so I can go check out your projects, or blog posts or contributions to open source projects. Show me something, give me some information that justifies why I need to hire you and I need to talk to you. Um, to get that visibility as someone who isn't in tech or doesn't have the background, my suggestions are someone just asked how important is networking. Um, I haven't done it as much, Kate. To be honest with you, it wasn't something that I was particularly good at. I sort of always ignored it. Um, there is a parallel universe in which I might have been a successful person if I did it, because I know a lot of people who are good at it and who do it and have gotten a lot of opportunities. But I think this ties back to what I was saying, which is if you don't have, if you're just starting in, networking can really help you showcase who you are and showcase how awesome of a person you are. Like when I have people on my team, part of it is, do I want to work with this person every day? Is this a nice person to talk to and work with? Part of my interview process is put the person in a challenging uh, place and see how frustrated they get and how they deal with it. Like if you get frustrated in 5 minutes and I can't argue with you over a work disagreement, then how am I going to be able to work with you on the long term? So, and I think networking is really good for that. It essentially, at the end of the day, creates opportunities for you through connections and through meeting other people. The other aspect of it is getting to learn from other people and what they use, and getting sort of a pulse on what's hot, what things are trending, what things are people using. One of our criteria in my last startup when we were choosing technology was how many meetups does, for example, I think we were deciding whether we should use Cassandra or some other NoSQL database at the time. And one of the factors was how many meetups do Cassandra people have in Boston? And that's important because that means that if I hit a problem that I can't solve, there are people in my community, in my distance, in my vicinity that I can go to. So take it as an opportunity to go meet people, talk to people. Some of them can end up becoming work opportunities, or some of them can become mentors. Some of them can teach you a few technologies, or just say, hey, like, go check out this open source project. It's great. So do it at the pace that you like. Again, it's not something that I've done a lot myself. Raymond, how to build your resume. My resume is very, very ugly. I have to admit. If you look into it, there are people who like optimize like based on eye tracking technology where people look at resumes, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's an overkill, to be honest. There are a few facts right now, especially with big companies, to know about resumes. It needs to be machine readable because majority of the companies, the majority of the softwares that accept resumes like JobVite, like LinkedIn, they have tech that early on read your resume and turn it into text and then match it against keywords of the job title. So make sure that to me means that stay away from super fancy formatting and super fancy things and designs because it might make it not readable by machines. That's one thing. The other thing is feature the information that is important and you want to feature. Like I personally care very little what your interests are. Do you do skydiving or not? To me, if that's front and center, that's a waste of space. It's cool to know that you're skydiving, but put it towards the bottom. What I want you to know, if, for example, you are in tech and you have a background in tech, is that you study tech. So put that in the you make sure that your education section is something that I see when I open your file. Um, Vice versa, if you don't have that background, make sure that the projects that you've done is featured in that space, so that when I open your resume, essentially you want me to see the things that would make me want to hire you, the first, so don't bury it around. Some people recommend having different resumes for different jobs. I've never done that personally. I think it's too much work, to be honest. And yeah, just make it readable. Consider that the person reading your resume, i.e. me, um, you're probably like the 50th resume they're looking at. Eye fatigue is a thing. So try to have it be very clear, like simple fonts, things like that, readable. It's a very utilitarian thing for me. I don't judge people by the design and the color of their resume. I judge them by the content of it, and I want to be able to consume the content as fast as possible. Any tips on where to start when building your portfolio? Portfolio for what part of the industry, Rafa? Let me know and I'll answer that. Because I think like design and creative side is very different than data engineering work. Like for example, for machine learning, Kaggle is a very good place to start. Like do a few competitions, do a few analysis. Um, uh, Co-worker of mine who joined Facebook recently did an analysis on the publicly available COVID data, um, and that made him a data science celebrity just because of that fact. So it depends on your field. Try to do something unique and try to do something that's substantial. If I go to your GitHub repo, I want to see things that I check is how interesting is the project? Did the person comment their code? How well do they write code? Because I'm going there because I want to see the quality of your work. Do they write tests or not for their code? If I go and I want to look at an analysis, I'm like how thorough they are. What did they look at? How do they plot things? How do they visualize things? How do they articulate ideas based on the data that they find? Frankly, I'm not very well versed on the front end side of things. I know on front ends, people that have amazingly beautiful resumes, and I envy them for that. But I haven't seen that much outside of the more creative side of tech. Cool. The last thing I have, and then I guess if there are no questions, we can end, is what is our interview process at Spotify? Which I think would be a good example of what are the steps, why are they designed the way they are, and how can you essentially navigate it. Usually with tech companies, you have multiple steps, as you probably already know. The first step is there's a job, you apply, you send your resume. Depending on the company, how big they are, how they're set up, how their HR is set up, either your resume goes to a person directly, which is the case for Spotify, where someone from HR looks at that. That's true for Google, that's true for Facebook and a lot of the other big tech companies, where you essentially have someone who's not technical go over your resume first. This is a hiring specialist or a recruitment specialist, depending on the company, and that's the person who reaches out to you first. This person is somewhat specialized in a lot of the big companies for the field that they're hiring for, but they're not a programmer. What specialized means is they know the utmost basics of the field. What they look for is essentially they go to talk to someone like me, which is the hiring manager, i.e., the manager of the team that is hiring, and said, okay, what's important for you? Give me some keywords, give me an expert of what the job is, and give me the job description, right? Based on that condensed information, they go, and when they're looking at resumes, they see literally how much overlap there is between what I told the person and what the resume says, right? Then they compile candidates. A lot of times, especially for the more senior roles, not only we specify we want an ML engineer, but we also specify we preferably want them to have like this type of background. Like I don't know, maybe it's finance, or maybe like I say, hey, I want someone who um, does visualization for us. So that would end up being part of the keywords as well. Based on that, they compile a list of resumes that they think are good candidates that I review now. So the second step, your resume is being seen by someone who is technical and who's managing the team. Um, at that point, I understand what's going on. I understand what the project means. I can go to your GitHub page, etc. And then I filter that again um, to people who I think we should directly talk to. Again, processes vary company by company, but generally this is the entire process. After that, you usually get into a technical interview, which is a phone screen with a technical person. They ask you a bunch of technical questions. The purpose of that interview is not to assess how amazing you are. It's so that to see if you pass the minimum requirement of a data scientist or a software engineer at this company. So the questions there are very general. Usually that's where you see algorithmic questions. That's where you see a lot of like general purpose. Hey, I want to do this to a string, or I want to like understand this data. So that is designed, and it's usually standardized across the company. The idea is to, again, move the candidate one step further into the territory of this person meets the bar for how technical we want this role to be. Then you usually get into in-person interviews, you meet the team, and you have very specific work-related questions. That's slightly different, for example, for like Google, where I think you do the entire interview without knowing which team you're going to, because their standard minimum bar essentially is company-wide standardized. So if you meet the bar, therefore you should be able to work at any team within Google. That's the ideology behind it. So yeah, that's the general process. Just keep that in mind whenever you're approaching the different steps. Like when you're talking to the recruitment person, know that they're not the technical person. You want to impress them in different ways than when you're talking to the hiring manager, which is the manager of the team, when you're talking to a fellow engineer that you're going to work with. And just bear in mind, this is, again, important to be a very approachable person that people want to work with. I think people underestimate how important it is to be just nice and very comfortable. I know it's a stressful situation. Everyone on the other end expects you to be stressed. If I come out of an interview and I feel like this person knew it, but then they couldn't answer it because they were very stressed, I usually, 90% of the time, I give them another chance. I'm like, let's move this to the next round and see if things are resolved. So it's fine. Everyone knows that you're stressed, and don't worry about that aspect of it. The other thing that I want to mention is the person who interviews you is not necessarily great at doing that. I've seen people conduct very bad interviews, and that's their problem. So if you come out of an interview and you felt like the interviewer was grilling you the wrong way, or was asking you the wrong question, or just wasn't very positive, don't take it on yourself. Every time I go through changing jobs, it's a very stressful process for me. I actually do not like job hunting at all, because it's a situation where you feel like maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe I don't know anything. And as someone who's been in this industry for 15 years, I'm telling you, I feel the same way every single time that I interview. Maybe I don't know, imposter syndrome kicks in. Those are all natural. and the other person on the other side also knows that. So just go in and be very relaxed about the process. Sometimes things work out, sometimes it doesn't. And generally, it's just a very, it's not the best process. I think most big companies agree that their interview process doesn't necessarily correlate with job performance. It's mostly done because there are no other options, frankly. Cool. And then I think there's one more question. In general, where do you prefer to work, in a corporate big company or startup company? Great question. There are pros and cons. My rule of thumb is start your career from a startup and decide if you want to go to a big company or not. The reason I say that is getting into a startup is much easier as a junior engineer, just the easy thing out. Secondly, you get to work with a lot more different things in a short amount of time than in big companies. Again, as I mentioned before, big companies usually have very specialized teams that do very specialized things. And when you join them, you do that one thing. That's your job. You don't get to do 25 different things. At a startup, my case being an example, you get to write Android code, you get to write backend code, you get to write data pipelines, you get visibility into a lot of things. And then after a few years, you suddenly are this generalist person that knows a little bit about everything and can communicate. And I think that just opens up your career path going forward. Our CTO at my last startup always used to say, you want to start your career very generally and very broadly and sort of like a pyramid. And then as time goes by and as you advance in your career, you want to specialize over time. So don't specialize early on. Try to get as broad of an understanding of how things work and how things connect together as possible early on. And those are the reasons that I really, really enjoy startups. Plus, startups are small. You get to know people, you form meaningful connections with people, and you get to know who's working on what. Downside of startups, in my experience, is that they're usually stressful environments. You can run out of money. Nearly all startups that I've been, one of the things that was mentioned in our weekly all hands or monthly all hands was, this is our runway. This is how much money we have. This is how much for the next 16 months we can pay the bills. And if we don't make it, then the company's bust. This is true for very small scale startups. So I'm talking like 5 to 50, 5 to 60. It happens to larger ones, 200 people as well. But when you get to that stage, you usually have figured things out. The other thing is with startups, the business model is not proven. So you have to do your due diligence in understanding, okay, I'm investing my time in this company. Is it going to be successful or not? And that's your job, because the person interviewing you is going to sell it to you as this is the next amazing idea that's going to happen. It's your job to understand whether the idea works or not, because frankly, the amount of salary that you're going to get at a startup is less than a large company. No startup will ever be able to, not ever, but most likely won't be able to compete salary-wise with Google and Facebook, or Spotify for that matter. And the benefit that you get out of the promise of a startup is, yes, we're paying you less, but then you have the opportunity to join a successful company early on, and then you have stock options and you have other financial ties, which hinges on the fact that it's going to be successful. And 95, something around 90, I don't want to quote the numbers because I don't remember it, but vast majority of startups fail. And by fail, not even acquired, just failed, like shut down. So do your due diligence. That all being said, if I were you and I was starting my career, I would start at a startup. Exhausted startups, talking about bigger companies. And this is sort of like a personality thing too. Like I have friends that I see them in a big company and I have friends that I see them at startup. So if you're trying to find a comfortable, stable, less stressful job where you can go to work and have a very good work-life balance, pays well, everything's great, do a big company. The number of days that I've worked till 10, 11 p.m. at night at a startup is significantly more than Spotify, for example. Spotify is the life balance is great. You meet great people, and it's a very the reason that I moved to one of the reasons that I moved to Spotify, apart from my love for music and all the cool stuff that they are doing within the music industry, was a few things. One is for ML and AI, you need data. Startups usually don't have data. So I wanted to go to a company where we had a large enough user base where we could apply ML. The second thing was at startups, projects change super fast. One quarter you're doing this, the next quarter the project is shut down because the company is switching focus and you're doing something else. And I was tired of that. I wanted to be able to do research on projects for a longer period of time, like a quarter or two, because some data science work requires a lot of time to pay off. And the third thing was this stress burned me out. My entire career, I was at startups, and finally, I just was tired of the stress, and I wanted to be in an environment where it's significantly less stressful and more stable. That all being said, I will probably go back to a startup at some point in my career because of the positives that I mentioned. One last thing about startups versus big companies. You'll become senior much faster at a startup than a big company. So a lot of people, what they say is try to advance at a smaller company because it's just easier and there's more opportunity, and then they join a larger company at a more senior level. Cool. I know we are at time. So if there are any more questions, I'm more than happy to stay. Otherwise, I guess we can wrap up.
I have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, hi. First of all, thank you so much for doing this. I am one of the co-founders of the Fiesta app, so really appreciate you getting on here and sharing your thoughts. One of the things a lot of things that you mentioned, literally, we're as a startup, at least for Fiesta, we're going through all of them in terms of sort of being a stressful situation. We've already pivoted 4 or 5 times since we launched the app. Our biggest pivot was, we launched the app in February because of COVID. We completely changed sort of the business model. And obviously sort of the running out of money is always some sort of a concern because it's been bootstrapped. But yeah, so everything that you mentioned is certainly applicable to Fiesta as a startup. But just wanted to hear your thoughts on the sort of the platform itself. Just really quick. I don't know how much time you had a chance to look at it, but it's basically like a marketplace of events with video conferencing, with all these like social media elements of gamification. So it's kind of like if you combine Eventbrite with Zoom with like Instagram/TikTok. That's what kind of like Fiesta is. Like the more fun and social version of Zoom. Just curious, if somebody like you who's worked in a lot of startups, what are your thoughts on Fiesta as a sort of ideas and just the app itself?
I, to be perfectly honest, have very little interaction with it outside of this call. The process so far has been very smooth. So thumbs up on everything that I've seen so far. In terms of I think, again, that this is my like business mind, more so than my technical mind. Mm-hmm. But the things that I really think about when it comes to startups are why is it needed? What is special about it? And then sort of who is the target audience, and then why are they going to use it? Right. I'll give you an example. I was talking to a friend of mine, and his idea was, let's have an app where you input, and I think similar apps actually exist, where you input like what you have in the kitchen, and then it tells you what you can make at home. I think some smart refrigerators actually have that now.
Right.
To me, when I hear that idea, I'm like, okay, why would a user use this? And what's the barrier to entry to that? Which is essentially, I need to input everything that I have in my house. And I don't want to do that. My takeaway from the startup world, if anything, is that people are very lazy, and they are not going to spend a lot of time on doing that. So I guess going back to your case, I think the question is, what differentiates it? In this context, I think given the pandemic, there is just more need for something like this because people just have more uses for it. But then to me, it comes down to, does it target corporate world? Does it target end users? Does it target education? It seems like your guys are targeting education and tech specifically, which is great, which means that you have a target audience in mind. But then acquisition of users, like how you're going to enter that space, how do you advertise it? Like, I think again, this is like pretty frankly, when I saw these tech series that's sponsored by you, my immediate thought is Fiesta is sponsoring this as a way to acquire users, as a way to like spread the word of like, this is the app that they're doing. And they want to create a word of mouth effect, essentially, which I think is great. As a byproduct of that, I'll go see what other events you have and might join it as well. So to me, again, long story short, I think the question is, how are going to people find it, and then what's as like the business people say, total addressable market for it? Like, what's your expectation of how many people are going to use it in the ideal state?
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. But so, again, very smooth all around.
Okay, that's good to hear. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you all for listening to me talk for a full hour. I hope it was useful to you. And then, yeah, if there are no more questions, then I'll jump out.
Yeah, I think the one of the hosts, I think VR King, he's having some connectivity issues. So yeah, I'm not sure if he's. Oh, there he is.
Hello, hello. I can hear you guys. Okay, can you hear me clearly? No.
Yep, yeah, we can hear you.
All right. So Behrooz, maybe you have some final words you want to share?
I frankly think I've talked enough for everyone's sanity. No, I like wish you all a very good job hunt if you're in the process for it, or if you're studying. I hope it goes well. I know pandemic is hard with all of that. Reach out to me if you have any questions. I think there's a link to my profile on LinkedIn. And in terms of hiring, definitely check out Spotify's website. I think overall the tech industry is less affected by the pandemic than any other industry. So that's, I think, very positive overall. And I see a very healthy environment in companies hiring and companies, people moving around and doing different things. So definitely keep an eye. If you want to apply for Spotify, definitely check out our jobs website and directly apply there. And if you have any questions, reach out to me on LinkedIn.